Frost clung to Rowena's eyelashes as she stared at the shivering, obsidian-furred pup huddled in the snow. Cast out and left to starve by her own kind, she had nothing to give. Yet sharing her last meal with this miserable creature would soon summon the most feared predators in the realm to her doorstep. Winter in the year of our Lord 1432 was unforgiving, a brutal expanse of endless white that threatened to swallow the Frost Peak Mountains whole. For Rowena Harding, the biting cold was a constant, mocking reminder of her absolute isolation. She lived in a dilapidated stone and timber cabin on the very fringes of the known territories, a place where civilized lycanthropes dared not tread. Rowena was an Omega, the lowest caste in the rigid hierarchy of the shape-shifting clans. But worse than being an Omega, she was a reject. Just 3 months prior, before the first snows fell, Lord Caspian of the Ashen Vale Pack had dragged her before the village elders. In the great hall, surrounded by the sneering faces of people she had grown up with, Caspian had severed their pack bond. "You are a drain on our stores, Rowena," Caspian had declared, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceilings. "You are small, barren, and weak. The ancient laws dictate that only the strong survive the coming frost. You are no longer of Ashen Vale." The severing of a pack bond was a physical agony, a tearing of the soul that left Rowena vomiting on the stone floor. She was given a single sack of dried meat, an iron flint, and a threadbare wool cloak, then marched to the territory lines and told never to return. She had found the abandoned cabin by sheer luck, spending the autumn patching the thatched roof with pine needles and mud, preparing for a lonely death. Survival became a mechanical routine. She trapped snow hares, gathered deadwood, and milked her only companion, a stubborn, shaggy nanny goat named Beatrice that she had found wandering the foothills. It was during a grueling expedition for firewood that Rowena's bleak existence shifted. The wind was howling a demonic shriek through the skeletal trees when she heard a different sound. It was faint, a pathetic, reedy whimper barely audible over the gale. Rowena paused, her worn leather boots sinking deep into the snowdrifts. She gripped her wooden staff and followed the sound toward a thicket of dead bramble bushes. There, half buried in a snowdrift and tangled in thorny vines, was a pup. Rowena dropped her firewood. The creature was incredibly small, its fur the color of a starless midnight. It was entirely still, save for the shallow, erratic rise and fall of its rib cage. As she dropped to her knees and brushed the snow from its coat, she realized this was no ordinary timber wolf. Its muzzle was broader, its paws disproportionately large, and the scent rolling off it, faint but distinct, smelled of petrichor and ozone. It was a Lycan pup trapped in its pure animal shift. "Where is your mother, little one?" Rowena whispered, her breath misting in the freezing air. She scanned the tree line, terrified that a monstrous she-wolf was watching her. But there were no tracks, no glowing eyes in the dark. The pup had been abandoned or lost. To take it in was a death sentence. Her rations were barely enough to keep herself and Beatrice alive. Feeding a growing Lycan, notorious for their insatiable appetites, meant starving herself. More dangerous still, harboring a pup from an unknown pack could bring the wrath of rival warlords down upon her fragile sanctuary. The pup let out a rattling sigh, its body growing colder. Rowena's heart, though battered and rejected by her own kind, broke. She could not leave it to freeze. Unfastening her cloak, she scooped the frozen bundle of black fur into her arms, wrapping it tightly against her chest. She abandoned her firewood and hurried back to the cabin, the wind whipping at her exposed face. Inside, Rowena laid the pup on a sheepskin rug near the stone hearth. She built a roaring fire and heated a small iron pot of Beatrice's milk. The pup was unresponsive. Its eyes were squeezed shut in the lethargy of near death. Rowena soaked a scrap of linen in the warm milk and gently pressed it to the pup's jaws, squeezing drops over its tongue. For hours, she sat beside it, massaging its cold limbs, willing the blood to circulate. "Come on," she murmured, rocking the tiny beast. "You can't give up. I know what it feels like to be left behind, but you have to fight." Sometime near dawn, the pup coughed. A tiny pink tongue darted out, licking the milk from its own nose. Then, slowly, its eyes fluttered open. Rowena gasped. The pup's eyes were a startling, luminescent gold, swirling with an intelligence that seemed far too old for its tiny body. It stared at her unblinking before letting out a soft, rumbling purr and pressing its wet nose into her palm. "I'll call you Bramble," Rowena whispered, a tear slipping down her soot-stained cheek, "because you're a stubborn little thing caught in the thorns." From that day on, Rowena's routine changed. She split her meager meals. When she managed to snare a rabbit, she boiled the meat into a tender stew, giving Bramble the lion's share while she subsisted on the broth and root vegetables. She fed him goat's milk every morning and evening. Every sacrifice felt physically agonizing. Her own ribs began to show prominently against her skin, but the warmth of the pup sleeping against her side at night gave her something the Ashen Veil had stolen from her: a purpose. For weeks passed, and the harsh medieval winter showed no signs of breaking. But inside the cabin, a bizarre phenomenon was unfolding. Bramble was growing at an alarming, unnatural rate. The tiny, shivering ball of fluff had morphed into a robust, muscular juvenile wolf in the span of a single month. His pitch-black coat was thick and glossy, and his paws were already the size of Rowena's hands. He no longer stumbled. He stalked around the cabin with a quiet, lethal grace that unsettled her. More striking than his size was his intellect. Bramble understood commands before she even spoke them. When Rowena went to the door to fetch wood, he was already there, pulling her cloak from its peg with his teeth. When she sat by the fire, shivering from the draft, he would drape his heavy, unnaturally warm body across her lap, radiating heat like a furnace. He was fiercely protective, growling at the shadows outside the windows and standing between Rowena and the door whenever the wind howled. The peace of their isolated existence was shattered on a gloomy Tuesday afternoon. Rowena was outside hacking at a frozen log with a dull iron axe when the crunch of boots on snow echoed through the clearing. She froze. Emerging from the tree line was Braddock, the cruelest tracker from the Ashen Veil pack. He was a massive, bearded brute who had always taken pleasure in tormenting the Omegas. "Well, well," Braddock sneered, his breath pluming in the air as he rested a hand on the hilt of his broadsword. "The exiled weakling still draws breath. Lord Caspian placed a wager that you'd be a frozen corpse by the solstice." "What do you want, Braddock?" Rowena demanded, tightening her grip on the axe handle as her heart hammered against her ribs. "Taxes," Braddock lied smoothly, his eyes raking over her property. "You're living on the border of our hunting grounds. I'll be taking that goat. Beatrice is all I have." Rowena stepped forward, blocking his path to the animal pen. "She's not on Ashen Veil land. Leave us be." Braddock laughed, a harsh, grating sound, and drew his sword. "Move, Omega, or I'll gut you and the goat." Before Braddock could take another step, a sound ripped through the clearing, a low, guttural snarl that vibrated through the very air. From the open door of the cabin stalked Bramble. But he did not look like a juvenile wolf. He looked massive, and his lips curled back to reveal rows of razor-sharp teeth. His golden eyes locked onto Braddock with pure, unadulterated, murderous intent. Braddock stumbled backward, his bravado evaporating. "What in hell's name is that?" he stammered. "That's no ordinary beast. It reeks of alpha blood." Bramble snapped his jaws, the sound like a steel trap closing, and took a menacing step toward the tracker. The sheer aura of power rolling off the young wolf was suffocating. "Keep your cursed goat," Braddock shouted, sheathing his sword and backing away rapidly. "But mark my words, Rowena, harboring an unregistered Lycan is an act of war. You'll hang for this." Braddock fled into the trees. Rowena dropped to her knees, trembling violently. Bramble trotted over to her, his terrifying demeanor vanishing in an instant as he nudged her face with his wet nose, whining softly to comfort her. "We have to leave," Rowena whispered, burying her face in his fur. "He'll tell Caspian. They'll come back and kill us both." Without supplies, escape was impossible. For the next 3 days, Rowena lived in a state of paralyzing dread. She boarded up the windows with scrap wood and brought Beatrice inside the cabin, keeping a roaring fire going. Every snapping twig sounded like an executioner's footsteps. On the fourth night, the storm of the century descended. The blizzard raged with biblical fury, dumping feet of snow and battering the tiny cabin. Inside, the fire flickered wildly in the draft. Rowena sat in the center of the room, an iron poker in her hands, staring at the reinforced door. Bramble was pacing. He wasn't frightened. He was agitated. He kept sniffing the base of the door, his ears swiveling. Then the howling began. It wasn't the wind. It was a chorus of wolf howls, deep, resonant, and so powerful they shook the dust from the thatched roof. It was a battle cry. Rowena scrambled to the window and peered through a crack in the wooden boards. Her blood ran cold. Emerging from the blinding whiteout, moving with synchronized military precision that defied the raging storm, were 4 colossal wolves. They were not from Ashen Vale. Caspian's wolves were gray and brown. These beasts were pitch black. They were gargantuan, larger than draft horses, with thick, heavily scarred coats that spoke of countless wars. They moved in a diamond formation. At the rear was a wolf with a white patch on his chest. On the flanks were 2 heavily muscled brutes. But at the front, leading the vanguard, was a beast so massive it blocked out the sparse moonlight. His eyes glowed a demonic crimson in the dark. "God save us!" Rowena breathed, stumbling backward. These were Alpha-class Lycans, the legendary warlords of the north. Bramble let out a sharp, excited bark and scratched at the door. "No, Bramble, no!" Rowena hissed, grabbing the pup by the scruff. But he easily slipped her grasp, sitting by the timber door and thumping his tail against the floorboards. Outside, the 4 monstrous wolves circled the cabin. They didn't attack the walls or try to break the windows. They simply stopped at the front entrance. Through the crack in the boards, Rowena watched the impossible happen. The lead wolf, the gargantuan beast with crimson eyes, began to shift. The sound of cracking bones and reshaping muscle echoed over the screaming wind. Within seconds, a man stood in the snow. He was breathtakingly tall, wrapped in a fur-lined dark leather battle tunic. His broad shoulders blocked the gale, and his face was a chiseled mask of aristocratic authority and rugged brutality, marred by a single jagged scar across his jawline. His dark hair whipped in the wind. He stepped up to the porch. Thud, thud, thud. A heavy fist pounded against the wooden door, splintering the aged timber. "Open the door, Omega." The voice boomed, deep and resonant, effortlessly cutting through the roar of the blizzard. "I have come for what is mine." Rowena pressed her back against the far wall, gripping the iron poker until her knuckles turned white. Beside the door, Bramble let out a joyful yip, eager to greet the monsters waiting outside. The hinges groaned as the massive man slammed his fist against the wood once more, threatening to rip the sanctuary from its very foundations. The timber door splintered inward with a deafening crack, the rusted iron hinges tearing free from the stone wall. A swirling vortex of snow and freezing wind immediately invaded the tiny cabin, extinguishing the hearth fire and plunging the room into chaotic shadows. Rowena screamed, scrambling backward until her spine struck the freezing masonry of the chimney. She raised her iron poker, her hands shaking so violently she could barely keep her grip. The colossal man stepped over the ruined threshold, ducking his head to clear the doorframe. Even in human form, he possessed the terrifying predatory grace of a beast. He was clad in dark leather armor bearing the crest of a silver crescent moon. Behind him, the 3 remaining monstrous black wolves flanked the entrance, their crimson eyes glowing through the blizzard like hellfire. Before Rowena could swing her weapon or beg for her life, Bramble darted forward. Rowena gasped, expecting the massive warlord to crush the pup. Instead, the terrifying intruder dropped to one knee, ignoring the biting cold of the snow blowing across the floorboards. Bramble launched himself at the man's broad chest, letting out a series of high-pitched, joyous yips as he frantically licked the man's scarred face. "I have you, little warrior," the giant murmured. His voice, previously a booming command that rivaled the thunder, was now thick with raw, undisguised emotion. He buried his face in the pup's black fur, inhaling his scent deeply. "I have you." Rowena lowered the iron poker, her mind reeling. The resemblance was undeniable. The pitch-black hair, the gold-flecked eyes of the pup contrasting with the crimson of the alpha. This was not a random stray. The man finally looked up, his piercing gaze locking onto Rowena. He stood, scooping the heavy pup into one arm with effortless ease. He kicked the broken door shut with his boot, sealing out the worst of the storm, and snapped his fingers. Immediately, the three wolves outside shifted, the sounds of snapping bones echoing through the wood. Three men, clad in heavy furs and similar leather armor, stepped into the cabin. "Light the fire, Gideon," the leader commanded. One of the men stepped forward, tossing a handful of powder into the hearth. A roaring magical blue flame erupted, illuminating the cramped, squalid cabin. The leader turned his attention back to Rowena. He took in her threadbare clothes, the hollows of her cheeks, and the way her collarbones jutted against her pale skin. Then he looked at the pup in his arms, robust, muscular, and incredibly healthy. "I am Duke Logan Cromwell of the Yorkshire Territories," the man stated, his voice a low, vibrating rumble. "And this is my son, heir to the Northern Pax. We have spent 4 agonizing weeks tearing the borders of Northumbria apart, searching for him." Rowena's breath hitched. Duke Logan Cromwell. He was a legend, a brutal and cunning warlord who ruled the untamed northern borders. To cross him was to invite absolute devastation. I didn't steal him, my lord," Rowena stammered, dropping the poker and sinking to her knees in submission, terrified he would misinterpret her possession of the child. "I swear it. I found him in the snow. I am an exile of the Ashen Vale. I had nothing, but I couldn't let him freeze." Logan's eyes darkened, a flash of murderous red illuminating his irises. "Ashen Vale, Lord Caspian's territory." "Yes," Rowena whispered, bowing her head. "My brother's convoy was ambushed by rogue mercenaries near the Shavat Hills," Logan explained, his voice dangerously soft. "They slaughtered his guards and took my son. We tracked the mercenaries and butchered them, but they had already sold the pup to a shadowed buyer. Tell me, Omega, how did my son end up freezing in your woods?" Rowena's mind raced, assembling the horrifying pieces of the puzzle. Caspian, Braddock's sudden appearance. Lord Caspian, always greedy for the fertile hunting grounds of the north, had orchestrated the kidnapping to extort the Duke. But when the Duke's armies mobilized with unprecedented wrath, Caspian panicked. Instead of fighting or returning the pup, Caspian dumped the heir in the frozen wasteland to die of natural causes, destroying the evidence. "Lord Caspian," Rowena breathed, looking up into Logan's eyes. "He severed my pack bond and exiled me before the first snow. But Braddock, his tracker, came here 3 days ago. He saw Bramble, your son. He recognized his alpha blood. He promised Caspian would return." A low, synchronized growl vibrated from the chests of the 3 brothers standing behind Logan. The sound was terrifying, resonating in Rowena's very bones. Logan set the pup down. Bramble immediately trotted over to Rowena, placing himself between her and the Duke, letting out a protective, albeit tiny, snarl at his own father. Logan's eyebrows arched in profound surprise. "He defends you. A royal alpha pup defends a banished Omega. I fed him every day," Rowena said quietly, resting a trembling hand on Bramble's head. "I had nothing but a goat, but we shared what we had. I named him Bramble, for I found him tangled in the thorns." Logan stepped closer, towering over her. He reached out a massive, calloused hand. Rowena flinched, but his touch was surprisingly gentle as he tilted her chin upward. He studied her emaciated face. "You starved yourself so that my son might eat," Logan said, his voice stripped of all hostility. It was a statement of profound reverence. "You gave him your warmth while you shivered. The Ashen Veil cast you out for being weak, Rowena. But I see a woman with the heart of a lioness." He released her chin and drew his broadsword. Rowena gasped, But Logan did not strike her. He drove the tip of the blade into the wooden floorboards and knelt before her. Behind him, his 3 brothers, lethal warlords of the North, did the exact same. "By the ancient laws of the lycanthrope kings," Logan proclaimed, his voice echoing with solemn authority. "You have saved the bloodline of Yorkshire. From this night forth, you are under the absolute protection of the Black Wolves. Any hand raised against you is a hand raised against me." The blizzard broke at dawn, leaving the Frost Peak Mountains buried beneath 3 feet of pristine, glittering snow. Rowena sat sipping a rich, spiced bone broth that Gideon had prepared from their travel rations. For the first time in months, she felt warmth radiating all the way to her core. Bramble was asleep in her lap, utterly exhausted from the excitement of the night. Logan stood by the patched window, his broad shoulders blocking the morning light. "They are coming," he announced simply. Rowena's heart skipped a beat. "Caspian, 36 men," Logan reported, not turning around. "Armed with silver-tipped crossbows and broadswords, they march through the eastern tree line. They intend to execute you and silence my son." Panic flared in Rowena's chest, a conditioned response to years of abuse. She instinctively moved to stand, but a heavy, reassuring hand on her shoulder stopped her. It was Cedric, Logan's youngest brother. "Do not fear the vermin, Lady Rowena," Cedric said with a smile, his eyes glinting with dangerous, feral anticipation. "They are marching blindly into a slaughter." Logan turned away from the window. He unclasped his heavy fur mantle and draped it over Rowena's shoulders, wrapping her in the scent of pine, leather, and immense power. "Stay inside. Keep my son close." The 4 men stepped out of the cabin into the blinding white morning. Through the gaps in the window boards, Rowena watched the terrifying spectacle unfold. Lord Caspian marched into the clearing, flanked by Braddock and a small army of Ashen Vale warriors. Caspian looked smug, wrapped in expensive velvets and furs, confident that he was about to tie up the last loose end of his treasonous plot. "Rowena!" Caspian shouted, his voice dripping with venom. "Come out, you wretched traitor. You are accused of harboring a beast of unknown origin. Your execution is ordered." Logan stepped off the porch. He did not shift. He did not draw a weapon. He merely walked forward, his 3 brothers fanning out behind him. The sheer oppressive aura of 4 alpha warlords rolling across the clearing was palpable, even from inside the cabin. Caspian froze. The color drained from his arrogant face as he recognized the crest of the silver crescent moon on Logan's armor. His warriors murmured in terror, some taking involuntary steps backward. Duke Cromwell?" Caspian stammered, dropping to one knee in a sickening display of forced obedience. "What an unexpected honor. We are merely here to dispense justice to a rogue Omega who—" "Silence!" Logan's single word cracked like a whip, echoing off the mountain peaks. "You orchestrated the ambush in the Shavat Hills," Logan said, his voice eerily calm as he closed the distance. "You paid mercenaries to murder my guards and steal my heir, and when you lacked the courage to finish the job or face my wrath, you discarded an infant to freeze in the snow, framing a banished, starving woman for your cowardice." "Lies!" Caspian shrieked, scrambling to his feet and backing away behind his men. "She stole the beast. The boy is alive," Logan interrupted, his eyes flaring crimson. "Because the woman you exiled as weak possessed more honor and strength in her starved bones than your entire lineage." Braddock, realizing the execution was not going as planned, panicked. He raised his silver-tipped crossbow, aiming directly at Logan's chest. It was a fatal miscalculation. The slaughter was instantaneous. The 4 Cromwell brothers did not even fully shift. In a blur of supernatural speed and terrifying violence, they tore through the Ashen Vale ranks. Swords shattered against hardened leather. Screams were cut short in the frozen air. Gideon and Cedric incapacitated the warriors, breaking arms and legs with surgical precision to disarm them without initiating a full massacre. Logan, however, bypassed the guards entirely. He closed the gap between himself and Caspian in a fraction of a second. He hoisted the treacherous lord into the air by his velvet collar, Caspian's feet kicking uselessly above the snow. Braddock, terrified, dropped his crossbow and turned to flee into the woods. A massive black wolf, Kalen, fully shifted, pounced from the tree line, pinning the cruel tracker to the snow by his throat. "Your lands are forfeit," Logan snarled into Caspian's terrified face. "The Ashen Vale now belongs to the crown of Northumbria. Your title is stripped. Your people will answer to my generals." With a flick of his wrist, Logan threw Caspian to the ground. The disgraced lord sobbed, humiliated and utterly defeated in front of his crippled army. The clearing fell silent, save for the groans of the injured. Logan adjusted his tunic, completely unbothered by the chaos, and walked back to the cabin. He opened the door, offering his hand to Rowena. "Come," Logan said gently. Rowena stepped out into the bright sunlight, the heavy fur mantle dragging behind her. The remaining Ashen Vale warriors, bleeding and battered, stared at her in utter disbelief. The Omega they had spat upon, the woman they had left to die, was standing at the right hand of the most powerful warlord in the realm. Logan looked down at her, a profound respect softening his harsh features. "You are not an Omega, Rowena. The ancient scholars write of wolves like you. Your scent was masked, suppressed by the starvation and cruelty of your environment. You possess the dormant blood of a matriarch. Caspian feared you subconsciously, which is why he cast you out." Rowena looked at Caspian cowering in the snow and then back to Logan. For the first time in her life, she did not feel small. "Pack your belongings," Logan said with a smile, reaching down to scratch Bramble behind the ears as the pup trotted out to inspect the defeated enemies. "The Yorkshire Keep is vast, and my son requires a mother who understands the true meaning of loyalty and survival." Rowena smiled, tears freezing on her cheeks, but they were tears of triumph. "Can I bring Beatrice?" she asked, gesturing toward the bleeding goat in the pen. Logan threw his head back and let out a rich, booming laugh that echoed across the conquered territory. "My lady, the goat shall have a royal stable all her own." Did Rowena's incredible journey from a rejected outcast to the honored savior of the northern warlords leave you breathless? If you love this tale of betrayal, survival, and ultimate revenge, hit that like button and share it with your fellow fantasy lovers. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more thrilling stories, epic wolf shifter romances, and deep dives into magical lore. Ring the notification bell so you never miss a wild adventure. What should we write next?